Hi, this is Eric Johnson, and I'm here with Dr. Janni Lloyd from Perth, Australia. Welcome, Janni. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Eric. How are you?
I am well, thank you, and thank you so much for being willing and able to journey into this conversation, because you've got some very, very interesting ideas that you've been involved with for several years. You, as I understand it, started out in the Western allopathic medicine model and then transitioned into more of a holistic and alternative type of motif. And I'd like to talk with you about that, and also your interest in the immortality movement, as it were. I believe it's called the philosophy of physical immortality and radical life extension. Is that right?
Yes, that is. Yeah, well, you know, it's 40 years next year since I actually started my love affair with the human body and entered medical school in 1973. And yeah, I feel that humanity is on a journey to really understand the magnificence of the human body. And I think we haven't really been fully aware of that. And my journey into embryology in particular was amazing. It just leaves one in awe when you know how the body comes together as a complex organism. So yeah, I needed to follow that understanding of the human body and the psyche and the emotions, and it led me on a very interesting journey into alternative medicine and spirituality and all the wisdom that is in those streams of understanding as well.
Tell me about the spiritual awakening. It seems that there has been, in many people's lives, a sort of spiritual awakening, and that merges with some awakening to the ideas of alternative medicine and an emphasis on health as opposed to the disease model of medicine that's so prevalent in our Western culture. How would you explain that?
Yeah, well, the doctor, of course, is really on the front line of life and death, and you are exposed to this question, and I guess it's the individual whether they will ask the questions. And I certainly always was about asking the question and finding out more about how we function as human beings, and that led me to Wayne Dyer's work and Deepak Chopra's work in the late 80s, and started to meditate and had some amazing experiences of my own, feeling the connection to the oneness and all of life, and also to multidimensional awareness and the feelings of bliss that one experiences when you're meditating. So with that dimension opening for me, I needed to then be able to bring that into my work, and the way I did that was to move into Soma colour therapy, which enabled me to look at the spiritual dimension as well as the psyche and the emotions and how all that impacted on the physical body. Although also in general practice I had a strong focus on the psyche and the emotions and how that impacted on disease and health. And so it wasn't that much of a stretch to take that step into that particular therapy.
And I hear an emphasis on the holistic nature. Instead of just focusing on one body part and its particular disease process, you're looking at the whole organism, including the body, mind, the soul, the spirit, the psychology, yes, all those different dimensions.
Yeah, and really in general practice, a good general practice doctor will do that. That's the great value of a doctor in general practice, is that they don't specialise in any particular area, so that their gift is to be able to orchestrate the understandings of the medical paradigm, and certainly alert a specialist if they see that, like, a medication has been given that will affect another part of the body that they hadn't been aware of. And although a specialist, if they're doing their job correctly, is going to be aware of that too, but
right.
The general practice should be about that holistic approach as well. Yeah, and I think that paradigm of understanding tends to focus too much on the imbalance instead of looking at the whole body. But it is improving. It really is improving. They are moving more into the understanding of preventative medicine, of the psyche and lifestyle and nutrition. When I first went to medical school, there was hardly any education on nutrition, and that's become much more of a thing that people are aware of in the medical paradigm.
I've talked to certain doctors that had no courses in nutrition, and others that had maybe one.
Yes.
But it certainly was limited, and of course, I think anyone that's really awake and aware now is going to realize that there's a lot of people starting to talk about raw food diets and things like that in and of itself will heal a person.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite, sometimes there are blinkers. It's quite interesting because even when I was at medical school, there was a whole range of studies that had already been done on the Seventh-day Adventists who are vegetarian. And, across the board, those studies showed that they had lower incidence of, all diseases just about. So, the evidence has been there for a long time. I think it's just they get drawn into this concept of disease, and they do have difficulty extricating themselves from that back into that holistic approach. And that's why, another reason why the alternative fields have that advantage, and they're not so weighed down by those understandings and traditions that the medical profession have.
I always look at the financial aspect of everything as well, just because of my background, and it seems to me, by observation, that a lot of the medical system that's in place now is driven by profit and money. And there's 5 things that could heal you, but we can't patent them. So, as the pharmaceutical industry gets involved in that process, it tends to skew it in other directions that aren't really geared towards health.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a factor. One would hope that doctors and individuals are not driven by that, but I think that they are influenced by it. And the pill and the antibiotic in general, pills and antibiotics were sort of like the magic cure that was discovered around about the 1930s.
Sure.
And, I think their medicines had a love affair with them.
To say the least.
Like my mother actually worked as a nurse in the 1930s.
Okay.
And she told me the story how they used to nurse people with pneumonia for 14 days, and on the 14th day they'd either live or die. And then the sulfonamides were introduced, which was the first antibiotic, and she said it was absolutely miraculous. Within a couple of days, these people were up and about and walking. So when you see things like that, you can understand why they became the miracle thing.
Sure.
And, so they certainly still have a place for a lot of people, but, it's only a small part of the whole health picture.
When you got into the alternative health modality that you were practicing, what kind of stories or what kind of experiences did your patients have that you were working with that you just couldn't have had given the other paradigm that you had left? I saw miracles everywhere, really. And, so much of it's not the tool, it's the individual and the person assisting that's involved that creates miracles in health and recovery. So, I've sort of moved past even wanting to talk too much about what tool is employed, because people will have faith in their various ways of doing it. But just one amazing thing that I did witness with the Soma therapy, a client was using the bottle and had in the reading that I did, it had revealed that he'd had a shock, some sort of shock in his childhood, but we couldn't pinpoint what it was that needed to be released. And he'd actually picked the ostrich bottle, and what he'd done was obviously stuck his head in the sand about this experience, not being able to deal with the emotion. And on the 3rd day of his appointment,
applying these essential oils and herbs that comprise the aura Soma, he had a vivid memory and awakening to the time he was 10 years old and his father died, and he was by the deathbed of his dad, and he died suddenly of a heart attack, and he relived the whole experience and heard what his mother said and was able to actually connect with the emotion of it, because at the time he wasn't even allowed to go to the funeral, he wasn't allowed to grieve and so on. So, releasing that and reconnecting with the feeling of it brought new experiences to him in his life, able to connect more strongly with his own son and things like that. So, yeah, there's been miracles all across that 40 years of medicine, and that was one of them.
That's amazing. Another testament to the mind-body connection, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do store memories in our tissues and in our subconscious, and they are one of the bases of dis-ease, I feel.
One of the strong basis for it, for sure. You've authored a book as well. I believe the title is The Fun Way of Physical Immortality Philosophy. Tell us about how you got involved in, or having an interest in physical immortality. It's a shocking idea for many people, so introduce that idea, if you will, gently perhaps, but introduce that to us.
Well, one would think that death is more shocking.
One would think, yes.
But I think what happens is that when you talk physical immortality philosophy and the fact that maybe we can go on for a long, long time, is that people actually have to look at death. And people have often been in denial of death. It's something they don't want to look at. And, so that's, I think, the thing that confronts them. Is that, okay, if I'm going to look at physical immortality philosophy, I need to look at what I believe about death.
Sure.
So I think that's the area of difficulty for people. So where would you like me to start with that?
Well, obviously, not everybody just wakes up and says, I wonder if there's immortals in the world. I maybe am the closest person to that many people will meet, because I actually had that sort of epiphany one day, and with the internet, there's all kinds of things that come up if you care to do a search on immortality and immortals. And that's ultimately how I found you and your information.
Yeah.
So
that's right, yeah. Well, I guess really, when I look at it logically, the pieces that were coming together in my consciousness were, when I was in general practice, of course, I saw people of many, what I call number, the number game. I call it the number game.
Right.
People think they're a certain number, so they have to be a certain way. Mm-hmm. So they were acting out their number game. And I also did 2 years in the Social Security Appeals Tribunal here, which is looking at people on invalid pensions and disability pensions, and whether they, are still entitled and things like that. So that was starting to really start to put up some thoughts in my mind, because many people would have a number that was like, 35, and they would actually look and behave as though they were a number of about like 75 and things like this. So I'm starting to really feel there's no consistency with this thing we call aging. If it was a disease that was, for all of us at a certain time, you'd think it would come on in some consistent way. So it was like, it doesn't make any sense. So I started to have a lot of thoughts that, maybe it's much more in our control than we think it is, and perhaps it's a chronic disease rather than something that's just inevitable. So that was one of the things that came into place. And then with my spirituality unfolding and my awakening to meditation and yin-yang balance and those sorts of things, I started to realise that, in fact, physical death is becoming a choice. And we're seeing that too playing out with the fact that the average lifespan is just exponentially increasing at the moment. So there's definitely something afoot for humanity at the moment. And having had those bits and pieces come together in my own consciousness, I then started to draw synchronicities about people that have lived way past what we believe is possible.
Right.
And has been documented. And I think what happens with these people is that they become they're very non-hierarchical, and they're very much about humanity will work this out in its own time. And Robert Kuhn estimates there's been about 10,000 immortals throughout history that are still probably around. And he feels that they just went off and kept it to themselves because humanity wasn't ready to experience it en masse. But I feel that humanity is moving into readiness, and that we will see this unfold over the next 100 to 150 years for everybody if they choose it.
There's a lot of societal considerations when you start considering that everybody, if everybody was all of a sudden immortal, it would change a lot of things very rapidly.
Yes, and I think that could be difficult for people. Yeah. So I think it's just going to happen life by life almost. And although some people say that we're going to reach a critical point where the mass consciousness shifts, and then everybody will suddenly have the consciousness of it. And then children will just be born into it, and they will just think, well, why did you ever believe anything different? Or why did you ever think anything different?
Sure.
And I think part of the journey is to actually become friendly with death in the form of change, because if we embrace the flow and change in life, then we don't get so stuck and stagnant in old beliefs and old ways, and we lose the juice for life.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons, and also the polarised reality that people have lived in, which created a lot of violence. That's one of the reasons why people have chosen death. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It brings into conversation a lot of related things like hypnosis and programming, and the kinds of programming perhaps that we've been subjected to or allowed ourselves to be subjected to, the presuppositions.
Yeah, I feel chosen. I think we chose it spiritually. If you really get the big picture, I think that Earth is a playground, and we just chose that experience. And we're choosing something different now.
It's certainly more empowering.
Death game.
Right. There's something, and when you get that there's something else available, and you live in that possibility, and you create the conversation around that, and
we live in infinite intelligence. We're constantly in contact with that infinite intelligence. So we can choose out of infinity what we choose to experience. And it's just a matter of breaking down those old programs and reprogramming to new realities. And we see that happening all the time. All the things that we now take for granted, like computers and all that, that's totally new realities to what was around 60 years ago. So, or maybe a bit longer than that, I don't know when the first computers were around.
Right.
So those sorts of things are happening in our outer world all the time, and they are also happening in our inner world. And I love the understanding too that comes through from the radioisotope studies that have been done that show that 98% of the molecules in our body are exchanged with the environment every year. So it means that there's very little of you left. After about 2 years, virtually you are not the same matter body as you were 2 years before. So what puts it all back together?
Yeah.
It's the consciousness, of course, that keeps it flowing as a physical body, because every molecule that existed 2 years ago has actually gone off elsewhere. So I think that is really exciting. We're actually living on the wings of life and death all the time.
And don't even know it. Don't recognize it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's awakening to that consciousness. And one of the medical models that's been around for a while is that, the body is like a machine. Well, we are not like a machine at all, because we're an open energy system, and we are continually exchanging with the environment. Whereas like your car or whatever is not, it's static. Its atoms are not flowing like ours are.
That's an interesting dichotomy between machine versus open energy system.
Yeah, so, the thing is, if you think, our body's a machine, it's going to wear down, and this comes into a lot of the thoughts around arthritis and things like that. My joints are wearing down and all this sort of thing. It's not reality, because our body is always exchanging, so it doesn't need to wear down at all.
What do you say to someone who's experiencing that right now? Let's say arthritis as a perfect example. What sort of a shift in consciousness, or what would that person at this point in time be recommended to do to upgrade their ideas or philosophies or practices? I mean, surely it's more than just one thing.
Yeah, it's well, obviously I'd say read my book.
As a starter, okay.
As a starter.
And by the way, where can people find your book?
Yes, it's available at lulu.com.
Okay.
And they can get it either as a printed book or as a e-book.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 options available. And the first chapter is about looking across medical science, quantum physics, alternative medicine and spirituality, and how that can all be integrated into this to make one aware of this new potential that is evolving for us all. So if somebody had arthritis, obviously they would start to look in. I would suggest they look into their psyche and emotions, actually talk to the wisdom of their body, start to tune into their body, tune into the pain, ask it what it's about, what emotion or emotional trauma that might have helped to contribute to that, what are their beliefs around life that are contributing to that imbalance, and take it from there. That's how I would approach it.
Right, and it's kind of like you take the first step, and the next step will be revealed to you as you move forward.
Ask the question, and then the universe provides the answers.
Mm-hmm. You used the word synchronicity earlier in a conversation. How has synchronicity, would you say, played a part in your own journey for taking a step and finding things connected in interesting ways?
Yeah, it's been very, very big. And I think it's Goethe that said, just take 1 or 2 steps in the direction of your dreams, and then the universe will just bring you things you'd never dreamed possible. And that certainly has unfolded for me over the last 20 years. As long as I didn't go into disbelief or distrust, the minute you find yourself in that, you block the avenues of the universe delivering.
Right.
So you need to just continually, if you feel that energy, you need to just open up again and say, I'm willing for the next step to be revealed, and so on.
Yeah, because that distrust and doubt and fear, that's all contraction as opposed to expansion.
Yeah, and nothing will come through. You're actually blocking the universe from bringing in the infinite possibilities. So yes, synchronicities have been amazing.
I don't know why I get the impression that you always are doing new research and having new input and data and so forth. What are some of the latest things in the world of the radical life extension, physical immortality conversation that you've explicitly been involved with or been exposed to or come up with?
Well, I guess the most exciting thing I'm doing at the moment is running 2 Facebook pages.
Okay.
Over the last just over 12 months, I've been running one called Healthy Life Extension, Physical Immortality Philosophy, and another one actually called The Fun Way of Physical Immortality Philosophy. And I think Facebook and the internet are extraordinary sources of people networking their understandings. And because this consciousness of ongoing healthy, vital life is a fairly new one, there aren't that many people in your local reality on the ground earth
right.
that may have similar views. You get a few, but you don't get large numbers. But the minute you're actually talking to the whole world, it's amazing where they come from. And the conversations, I think it's very much a brainstorming thing as well. We're all adding our points of view and our perspectives and our experiences.
Sure.
And often having those dialogues, and then the understanding gets more and more solid as all of those understandings come in. Yes. So
it's probably why knowledge is doubling every, whatever period it is now. It used to be once a year it was doubling, and now it's probably every 90 days or so.
That's right. Yes, it's extraordinary times. And the other area of a lot of interest too for me, coming from that medical science perspective, and the theoretical physicists like Michio Kaku, he did a program on TV in the last couple of years called Visions of the Future.
Mm-hmm.
And those people are very openly talking of physical immortality. They see it as coming mainly through the medical science developments. Ray Kurzweil as
Sure.
well. They talk about singularity.
Right.
So there's this rapid increase in our wisdom as a human race and as an individual. And they see it as, in the next 100 or so years also presenting this potential for physical immortality as well. They probably see it as being, that there'll need to be medical interventions. There may be along the pathway, but I feel the more that we can understand how brilliant and amazing our physical body already is, and keep affirming that and allow it to blossom and not have all that old conditioning of decay and decrepitness coming from our psyche and emotions, I think it allows the divine life intelligence to do what it wants to do, and that's to maintain ongoing health. So I think a lot of those interventions won't be necessary.
That's a very interesting field, and certainly Ray's work is starting to get more popularity.
Yes.
with people. The Singularity is Near, I think, is the title of one of his books.
Yeah. Another two people I really must mention before I leave this section is Ellen Langer, Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer's work.
Okay.
It's an amazing study called Counterclockwise, where she took men in their 70s and recreated them into the 1950s,
mm-hmm.
and got them to live and behave for a week as though they were living in the 1950s, and did studies on them before and after, and she had huge statistical differences in their well-being and their health and youthing in that time, just in a week.
I read about that study, and I was unbelievably perplexed and amazed all at the same time that it could have that kind of effect on people. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, so rapidly. So she's done amazing work, and she's now got a book out called Counterclockwise. It's well worth reading.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is Dr. Bruce Lipton. He was a cell biologist who's done a lot of work on stem cells,
mm-hmm.
and he's also he started working with them in the 1960s, and he talks about how the environment of where the stem cell is put, what sort of petri dish environment and so on. So is how it actually responds, and the health of the stem cell and those sorts of things. So his work he's written a book called The Biology of Belief.
Yes, so amazing work there too.
Those sorts of insights are like the linchpins of connecting realities together. This is how we will, more focus on that will awaken our potential for our own individual ongoing life and health. Because remember, it's always our own journey as well as humanity's.
Yes.
Yeah, so they are very important areas to research.
The importance of belief cannot be understated in the process.
Absolutely, absolutely, because that shuts the door on possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
If we say something isn't possible, then nothing can come to us. I think it was Henry Ford or one of those people said, if you believe you can, you will, and if you believe you can't, you won't.
That's right. The
bottom line is that. And if humanity continues to believe that it has to die, then that's the reality we will continue to create.
I think
if we open up to the potential that maybe we are moving into a time where that is becoming a choice, that in itself creates freedom for our scientists to research, for funding and all sorts of things. So, just at a very basic, practical level, not even talking spirituality, I think it's an important step for us all to embrace. For our children, even if we as pioneers don't reach those lofty, if I'm still not here in 300 years or whatever, at least I'll have opened a door for that potential for ongoing generations.
Laying the foundation.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories about that is probably one you've heard before, is about Roger Bannister, who was the first individual to run a 4-minute mile.
That's right.
And I believe as the story goes, correct me if I'm wrong, it hadn't been done up until he did it. And once he did it, then everybody was doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, and the other thing I think to look at too is because sometimes the temptation when we're talking about this is to get a bit ungrounded, But if we even just look at what has been well documented, and the woman who has lived the longest, according to the Guinness Book of Records, lived for 122 years. So even if we all aspired to live just as long as has been documented, that in itself would be huge, because that's another 40-odd years on what most people think is like exit time.
Interesting you bring that up. One of my colleagues or acquaintances is a Mr. America from the 1960s, and he was a naturopathic doctor at one point. He doesn't practice that way anymore, but he still has the designation, of course. But one of the people that he mentioned to me was a gentleman by the name of Shareli Muslimov, who I believe National Geographic even did a piece on him back in the 1970s. He allegedly lived to around 160.
Right.
And he lived in the same area, I believe, that the woman you just mentioned lived in, which was near Abkhazia, which is in near the Caucasus Mountains. But whether it was 160 or 140 or 120, the reality is that there are people on the planet today that are living into their hundreds. And they don't suffer the degenerative diseases that Western civilization experiences as a whole.
Yeah, that's right. And even in our Western culture, there are people doing amazing things. Like 100-year-olds breaking marathon records, and I think these are people that are putting what I call runs on the board. That's a cricketing term from here. They're actually doing some of this stuff, and it's like, let's get over this idea of wanting to write people off, because their number says this, they are only allowed to do this, this, and this.
Right.
It's like, let them have space to breathe.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. And, the other thing that always comes up too is, population, overpopulation, all this sort of thing. And I don't think that will be a problem.
No.
As people get more control of their lives, the first thing that happens is, the birth rate goes down. And so that will just become more into balance, and the children who do come on the planet will actually be wanted. So that's the first factor to look at. The other thing is there are vast tracts of deserts all over the world that are as yet uninhabitable. Well, with desalination and things like that and all sorts of technologies that are coming through, water will be brought to those places. So, more areas to populate. Other things like if there's a trend towards vegetarianism, more land there that isn't involved in raising beef cattle and things like that.
Absolutely.
And, in the way out future, perhaps there's other planets to colonise. So I really don't think an individual should put off their own thoughts of immortality on the basis of thoughts of taking a space that somebody else needs to occupy.
No, those are objections that have been, rationalized away by intelligent people.
Yeah.
There's plenty of space.
It's just an avoidance thing, I think, for really looking at this. There's a brilliant fable written by Nick Bostrom, who is part of the Futures Department. I think it's at Oxford in England, and it's called The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. And it's all about this belief in physical death and how we've lived with it for so long. And he's coming more from a medical science perspective, but it's a very, very interesting fable for people to read. It's very, very good how he illuminates this awakening that is happening.
created through validation. And when you begin to expose your mind to these ideas, the books that you've written and the ones that we've referenced in the conversation here, you begin to start realizing that there's, a different world available that you have access to because of exposure to some new ideas and elevating your thinking and your belief sets.
Yes, that's right. And what I also stress is that physical immortality philosophy is a now moment philosophy that actually increases your quality of life now.
Right.
And the now moment is all we ever have, because life is always an ongoing flow. So the now moment is as important as any thought of how long we're going to be around. So it does actually increase your quality of life now, because you start to affirm the magnificence of your physical body and your health and vibrancy and joy and love and gratitude for life and all of those things. So it's actually very life-affirming in the now moment.
Wow, and those are such great, I say concepts. Those are important. Those are critical. People think of them glibly, love and gratitude, but those are key components. I think that anybody who is truly living an extended lifespan, quality-wise, is going to affirm that you have to have love and affinity and gratitude as part of that psychological makeup.
Yes, yeah, and there's more and more studies that are coming out now too that are showing how powerful they are on the health of the body. So, yeah.
Interestingly enough, I think it was Greg Anderson wrote a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Wellness a number of years ago, and I read that, and he is a person who was labeled a terminal cancer patient and so forth. Anyway, of all of his laws, if you will, in his book, he referenced the forgiveness principle, which dovetails nicely with love and gratitude. And he said that essentially in his experience that when he began to forgive the people in his life, and it was a pretty long list that he had going, that's when his cancer turned around.
Yes, it is extremely powerful. And I talk about it in my book too, that gratitude is actually a step even slightly more evolved than forgiveness.
Yes.
Because if we can put those things into gratitude straight away, it just moves it even more quickly, and you realise that nothing comes into your life without a learning in it. And even though it seems to be a negative experience, if we react with gratitude and use that law of gratitude, the gift of the experience will be illuminated. And it's so empowering. I've used that so many times and seen other people around me how it will just move mountains of old conditioning and old emotions that no longer serve. And it's very powerful.
That's amazing. That even, as radical as it sounds, can take the form of being thankful for a bodily ailment as a teacher. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, and how I explain that too is like, for example, if somebody creates cancer, in the normal way of going through their treatment and so on, and they do perhaps reach the time where they are deemed free of cancer. That might be 5 years or so down the path. And often they have the story, now I'm almost grateful for my cancer because it got me to leave work, start playing the piano, learning the piano that I always wanted to do. So suddenly life opened up for them.
Yes.
And they were able to express themselves in different ways. So after that journey of time, they say, I'm now virtually grateful for my cancer. So what we're suggesting is if anything negative comes into your life, or seemingly negative, that you actually surround it in gratitude straight away, even though your ego will be actually yelling at you, are you crazy?
Right, the resistance.
You have the willingness. It's just even a willingness, because you can't even feel it for a while, not really. Just have a feeling of being willing to be grateful for it. It shines so much light on it unwraps the gift, basically, and it allows you that space to reinvent yourself, give yourself other choices. So it is extremely powerful.
That's beautiful. In fact, one of the books on my bookshelf is called Coaching Through Cancer, and it was written by a lady who's had exactly that experience that you just outlined right there.
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't have to take 5 years. It can, as long as you're willing to bring in the gratitude straight away, it can happen much more quickly.
Yeah, it's really how quickly you want to do the work.
Yeah, and in fact, if you stay in a state of gratitude, you don't draw those experiences to start with, because you're more aware of, your love and your passion and your joys, and you just flow with them rather than have to get really stuck and stagnant and draw something very negative to actually awaken to them again.
Right.
Yes. So in time, this unfoldment will become much easier.
Well, I am so excited that you have been willing to participate in this really fascinating dialogue. Before we go, do you have any interesting things coming up that you're going to be involved with that people should know about, or any projects or interesting things that you might want to mention?
Possibility of me doing a seminar in New Zealand in early December. It's not fully confirmed yet, but if they're in New Zealand, they can listen out for that.
Okay. And what kind of things do you cover in your seminars? What do those look like now?
Yeah, they pretty much follow along the lines of my book, The Fun Way of Physical Immortality Philosophy. And I look at the overall concept first, and then I take people through exercises of creativity and just very basic dance movements and using their voice, and it's just basically a whole lot of fun and creativity and life-affirming techniques, meditations, things like that to help them to open up and to really ground this reality for themselves, and to just create the space for the expression of it and the looking deeply at it, because there's not enough space in our reality, our mass reality at this stage is actually created for that yet. So
right.
That's what I do.
Well, that's awesome. And again, the title of your book is The Fun Way of Physical Immortality Philosophy.
That's right.
And it can be found at lulu.com. And do you have a website as well?
I have a blog.
Okay.
And if they just Google Dr. Janni Lloyd, that comes up. That's probably the simplest way to find it.
Okay, outstanding.
Yeah. And I also have a couple of YouTube clips now too that, quite interesting. So people might get something out of that.
Absolutely.
And I'll hopefully do some more of those soon. So, yeah.
It's a fun way to connect with the world, right?
Yes, that's right.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being, again, available and willing to have the conversation. We really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Eric.